The tower frequency crackled with static before the voice came through, calm as winter fog. Tower, Hog 27 requesting emergency vectors. Single engine, hydraulics at 40%, and I've got about 6 minutes of fire suppression left. The controllers at Bagram Air Base froze. Hog 27 wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The aircraft had been listed as combat ineffective over an hour ago, last seen trailing smoke over the Tangi Valley after a surface-to-air missile detonated close enough to shred its starboard engine. The pilot had gone silent. No ejection beacon. No mayday. Just the howl of wind through a shattered cockpit and then nothing. Command had already begun drafting the casualty report. But now, impossibly, she was back. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that limped into visual range looked like something dragged from a scrapyard. Its right engine was an inferno of orange and black, flames licking back along the fuselage in defiance of every aerodynamic principle. The left engine coughed and sputtered, barely generating enough thrust to keep the 30,000-pound machine airborne. Hydraulic fluid streamed from punctured lines, painting dark trails across the desert sky. The vertical stabilizer was shredded, more absence than structure, and the entire right wing bore scorch marks and shrapnel gouges that revealed bare metal underneath. Yet it flew. Somehow, it still flew. Inside the cockpit, Captain Eris Kovach gripped the stick with both hands, her knuckles white beneath torn gloves. Blood traced a thin line from her hairline down past her visor, the result of a fragment that had punched through the canopy and grazed her temple. Her breathing came in controlled, measured pulls through the oxygen mask. Pain was a distant country she'd visit later. Right now, there was only the aircraft, the sky, and the narrow ribbon of runway growing larger through the cracked glass. She'd lost her heads-up display 20 minutes ago. Navigation was instinct and landmarks now. The AN Arc 210 radio was dying, power fluctuating with every surge from the crippled electrical system. If she lost comms entirely, they'd never clear the runway in time. Emergency crews wouldn't know where to position. And if that engine decided to quit before she crossed the threshold, she'd be dropping into a populated section of the base perimeter at 140 knots with no ejection seat option. The Martin Baker seat had taken shrapnel too. The canopy jettison system was compromised. So ejection wasn't on the menu. It was land this broken bird or become a statistic. Those were the options. Eris had always preferred simple math. 3 hours earlier, the mission brief had been routine to the point of tedium. Close air support for a special operations team conducting census operations in a village near the Pakistani border. Show of force, maybe a gun run or two if insurgents got bold, then back to base for lukewarm coffee and paperwork. Eris had flown 73 combat sorties without incident. She knew the rhythm of these missions the way a musician knows a familiar song. Launch orbit, check in with ground controllers, provide presence, return. The A-10 wasn't glamorous. It didn't break the sound barrier or carry cutting-edge stealth technology. It was a flying tank built around a gun, designed during the Cold War to shred Soviet armor in European fields that would never see that particular war. But in Afghanistan's unforgiving mountains, the Warthog had found its second purpose. The aircraft didn't care about prestige. Neither did Eris. She joined the Air Force from a nowhere town in Montana, the daughter of a mechanic who drank too much and a schoolteacher who'd left when Eris was 9. No legacy, no connections, just test scores that caught a recruiter's attention and a stubborn refusal to accept limitations other people tried to impose. Flight school had been a gauntlet of condescension wrapped in professional courtesy. She'd outperformed 70% of her class and still heard whispers in the ready room, too aggressive, too cold, trying too hard to prove something. The call sign Frost had been assigned during her first operational squadron, intended as mockery. She flew like emotions were a luxury she couldn't afford, they said, like she had ice in her veins instead of blood. She'd never corrected them, let them think what they wanted. Results spoke louder than locker room gossip. 73 sorties, 0 mistakes. She'd put ordnance on target within meters of friendly positions, talked ground controllers through ambushes, and brought her aircraft home through weather that grounded half the wing. Competence was its own vindication. Or so she'd believed, until the missile rose from the tree line like the finger of an angry god and turned her afternoon into a nightmare. The explosion had been a physical thing, a shockwave that hammered the aircraft sideways and filled the cockpit with the smell of burning insulation. Eris had felt the controls go mushy immediately, the stick sluggish and unresponsive. Master caution lights illuminated across the panel in a cascade of amber and red. Fire warning for the right engine. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Flight control degradation. The A-10 was designed to absorb punishment. Its redundant systems and titanium bathtub surrounding the pilot meant to survive hell itself. But even the Warthog had limits, and whoever had launched that missile knew exactly where to aim. She tried to gain altitude, get enough separation to assess the damage and plan a recovery, but the aircraft fought her. The right engine was hammering itself apart, turbine blades disintegrating and chewing through containment housings. She pulled the fire suppression handle, felt the chemical agent dump into the engine bay. The fire warning light flickered, dimmed, then blazed back to full intensity. The suppression system was damaged too, leaking precious extinguisher into the slipstream instead of smothering the flames. Eris toggled the radio. Dagger 6 Hog 27, I'm hit. Single engine, fire warning, losing hydraulics, egressing north. Her voice was level, almost bored. Years of training had conditioned that response. Panic killed pilots faster than enemy fire. The ground controller responded immediately, young and tight with controlled fear. Hog 27, Dagger 6 copies. Can you maintain altitude? She scanned the instruments. Airspeed bleeding. Altitude holding for now, but the left engine was carrying the entire load and it wasn't happy about it. Negative. I'm going to need a straighten approach at Bagram. Advise emergency services. Silence, then, Hog 27, say souls on board, the question every pilot dreaded. They were asking if she was alone, calculating the cost. One life versus the risk of a catastrophic crash on a major airbase. Eris glanced at the empty seat beside her in the single-seat cockpit and almost smiled. One, she said, just her, always just her. The valley fell away beneath the dying aircraft as Eris nursed it north. Every adjustment was a negotiation with physics and failing machinery. The right engine finally seized completely, the fire now uncontained and spreading. She shut down fuel flow, pulled all the circuit breakers she could reach, anything to starve the flames. It helped marginally. The temperature gauges crept upward anyway. Metal was melting back there, titanium and steel surrendering to heat they were never meant to endure for this long. Her tablet computer strapped to her thigh showed the map and her position. 60 miles to Bagram. At her current speed and rate of descent, she'd make it with maybe 2,000 feet to spare. Maybe. The math was razor thin. One more system failure, one more loss of thrust, and she'd be walking home. Except there was no walking home from these mountains. The terrain below was a maze of ridges and valleys held by people who would celebrate her capture. The special operations team she'd been supporting was too far south to help, already fighting their own battle. She was alone up here, just her, and a wounded machine that should have quit already. But the A-10 was stubborn. It kept flying because that's what it was built to do. Eris understood that stubbornness. She'd built her entire career on it. When instructors said she didn't have the temperament for fighters, she'd flown circles around their star pupils in aggressor training. When squadron commanders suggested she'd be better suited for tankers or transports, she requested the A-10 specifically because it was the aircraft nobody wanted until the shooting started. The ugly duckling of the Air Force inventory, too slow and ungainly for the jet age. But in the dirt and chaos of close air support, the Warthog was exactly what ground troops prayed for. She'd saved lives with this machine, dozens of them. Broken ambushes, destroyed fighting positions, turned the tide of engagements that would have ended in massacre. The infantrymen knew her call sign, Frost. They cheered it over the radio. And now that same aircraft was dying around her, kilometer by kilometer, and all that mattered was getting it home. Bagram Tower vectored her around restricted airspace, giving her the most direct path to the runway. Other traffic was diverted. The entire base held its breath. Eris could hear it in the frequency discipline, the way controllers spoke in precise, clipped sentences. They were professional, but she could read the tension underneath. They'd seen aircraft shot up before, but usually those pilots ejected over friendly territory or nursed their planes to emergency fields with support standing by. She was attempting to land a craft that was actively on fire at a major operations hub, threading a needle between catastrophic crash and miraculous survival. The left engine coughed. Her heart, which had remained steady through everything else, hitched. Not now. She adjusted fuel mixture, praying to God she didn't believe in. The engine smoothed out, resumed its labored song. She exhaled slowly. The fire in the back was eating through control surfaces now. She could feel it in the sluggish response, the way the aircraft wanted to roll right and down. She was fighting constant trim inputs, muscles burning with the effort of keeping wings level. Sweat soaked through her flight suit, despite the altitude chill. Hog 27, Bagram Tower, you're cleared for emergency landing any runway. Fire equipment is standing by. Winds 270 at 8 knots. The controller's voice was calm, almost gentle. We've got you, ma'am. Eris keyed the mic. Tower Hog 27 declaring emergency. Gear will be coming down late. If I drop it too early and lose that hydraulic pressure, I'm not getting it back up. She paused. I'm making this work. Clear the approach corridor. There was admiration in the controller's acknowledgement. Runway's all yours, 27. Bring it home. The mountains gave way to high desert and then the sprawl of the base complex. She could see it now, the long stretch of runway like a promise written in concrete. Altitude was 2,000 feet, speed barely above stall. The aircraft shuddered and groaned, every rivet and weld protesting continued existence. Eris dropped the landing gear at 400 feet, felt the mechanical clunk as the wheels locked down. One green light, two. The third flickered amber. Nose gear was questionable, of course it was. She cycled the gear handle, got nothing better. Amber would have to be good enough. The fire behind her roared louder now, freed from suppression, consuming everything it could reach. Black smoke poured from the aircraft, visible even through the cracked canopy. She looked like a comet falling to Earth. The runway threshold rushed up. She held the nose high, bleeding off speed, feeling for the ground through vibrations and instinct. Her glide path was steep, the approach more controlled crash than landing. At 50 feet, the left engine hiccuped again. At 30 feet, it died completely. The A-10 dropped like a stone the final distance. Eris hauled back on the stick with everything she had. Main wheels contacted concrete with a shriek of tortured rubber. The impact slammed her against the harness hard enough to leave bruises. The nose gear, that questionable amber light, crumpled on contact. The aircraft pitched forward, the nose scraping along the runway in a cascade of sparks and grinding metal. She was still moving at 80 knots, too fast. The nosewheel assembly was disintegrating, dragging the aircraft left toward the runway edge. Eris stood on the right brake, felt it grab, felt the aircraft fight to straighten. Fire trucks raced alongside, foam already spraying. The burning right engine finally separated, tumbled away in a ball of flames and debris. Freed of its weight, the aircraft straightened. 50 knots, 40, 30. It came to rest 3,000 feet down the runway, smoking and broken and absolutely magnificent. Eris sat in the cockpit for 3 seconds, hands still on the controls, adrenaline finally crashing through her system in waves. Then training took over. Canopy jettison was compromised, so she reached for the manual release. The canopy cracked open with a hydraulic wheeze. Fresh air and the smell of foam and jet fuel washed over her. She unplugged oxygen and comms, unbuckled the harness with shaking fingers, and climbed out onto the wing. Her legs nearly gave out when she dropped to the concrete. Firefighters caught her, guided her away from the wreckage. Someone was asking if she was injured, but the words seemed to come from very far away. Eris turned back to look at the aircraft. The A-10 that had carried her home was a ruin, its right side charred black, the tail section partially melted, the nose gear collapsed in a twisted mess. But it sat there on the runway, defiant and unbroken in the ways that mattered. She'd brought it back. Against probability and physics and fire, she'd brought it home. A flight surgeon appeared, shining a light in her eyes, checking the gash on her forehead. Eris pushed the attention away gently. "I'm fine. Check the aircraft. We might be able to salvage components." The doctor stared at her like she'd spoken in ancient Greek. "Captain, you just flew a burning aircraft with one engine for an hour. You're not fine." Eris met his gaze with eyes the color of winter sky. "I'm standing. The aircraft is on the ground. That's the definition of fine." Around them, the base was returning to normal operations. The tower cleared traffic to resume. Fire crews doused the last flames. Maintenance personnel approached the wreckage with tablets and cameras, already beginning the investigation. Somewhere, a commander was being briefed. Reports were being written. The machinery of military bureaucracy was grinding into motion. But here, on this section of runway still slick with foam and scorched rubber, there was just a pilot and the machine that had trusted her enough to keep flying when it should have fallen from the sky. A captain from operations approached, tablet in hand, incredulous smile on his face. "Kavach, how the hell did you fly that thing back?" Eris pulled off her helmet, let her sweat-soaked hair fall free. "It's an A-10, she said simply. "It doesn't know how to quit." The debrief lasted 3 hours. Eris sat in a windowless room and recounted every moment from missile impact to final stop in precise, clinical detail. Investigators asked about mechanical failures, control inputs, decision points. They wanted to understand how she'd accomplished what should have been impossible. She answered each question with the same flat affect she'd maintained in the cockpit, translating terror and triumph into data points and timelines. It was easier that way. Emotions could be examined later, in private, where they wouldn't be documented and analyzed. When they finally released her, night had fallen over Bagram. The base was a grid of lights against mountain darkness. Eris walked to the flight line, found her way to the maintenance hangar where they'd towed the remains of Hog 27. It sat under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by technicians with notepads and cameras. They looked up when she entered, fell silent. The chief master sergeant, a 30-year veteran named Holland with lines on his face like carved stone, approached. "Captain," he said quietly, "I've seen a lot of shot-up aircraft. This one should have killed you." Eris nodded. She knew. They both knew. Holland gestured to the tail section where the shredded vertical stabilizer bore the remnants of nose art, a frost pattern intricate and delicate wrapped around her call sign. "We'll save this," he said. "Frame it. This bird earned a place in history tonight." She reached out, touched the scorched metal. It was still warm. "She deserves better than a museum," Eris said. "She deserves to fly." Holland's expression softened with something like pity. "Ma'am, this airframe is done. We'll strip parts for other birds, but she's never leaving the ground again." The words landed heavier than she'd expected. Eris withdrew her hand, nodded once. "Then make sure every part goes to good use. She's got more to give." She left before the emotions building behind her sternum could manifest in ways that would embarrass her. The next morning, Eris woke in her quarters to find messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Former classmates, instructors from flight school, ground controllers from previous deployments. The story had spread with the speed of wildfire through the military's informal networks. Frost brought back a burning warthog on one engine. Frost landed with no nose gear and a fire that should have melted the airframe. The details varied, growing more dramatic with each retelling, but the core remained. A pilot had defied death with skill and stubborn determination. In the squadron-ready room, the atmosphere was different. Pilots who'd barely acknowledged her before now stood when she entered. The squadron commander, a lieutenant colonel named Briggs who'd always been professionally distant, called her into his office. "Kavach," he said without preamble, "I'm putting you in for a distinguished flying cross. What you did yesterday was extraordinary. You're also grounded pending the investigation's completion." The contradiction hung in the air. Hero and liability simultaneously. Eris wasn't surprised. How long, she asked. Briggs shrugged. Could be a week, could be longer, depends on what maintenance finds and whether any procedures were violated. She wanted to laugh. Procedures. She'd improvise survival from moment to moment, making decisions based on feel and desperation. But the military needed its boxes checked, its regulations satisfied. Understood, sir. She turned to leave. Kovac, Briggs's voice stopped her. For what it's worth, every pilot in this squadron would want you on their wing. What you did wasn't just skillful, it was brave. Eris met his eyes. It was necessary, she corrected. The aircraft could still fly, so I flew it. She spent the grounding walking the base, watching other sorties launch and recover, feeling purposeless and adrift. Flying was identity. Without it, she was just a person occupying space, waiting for permission to become whole again. 4 days into the grounding, a delegation arrived from Air Combat Command. 3 colonels and a 1-star general, flanked by public affairs officers with cameras. They found Eris in the gym, running until her thoughts quieted. The general, a woman named Santos with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, waited until Eris finished and approached the treadmill. Captain Kovac, walk with me. They left the gym, moved through the base in the golden hour before sunset. Santos didn't speak for a long time, just walked with hands clasped behind her back. Finally, I flew A-10s in the Gulf War, she said. Took ground fire over Basra, lost hydraulics and half my electrical system. Managed to get to a tanker, took on enough fuel to make it to a recovery base. They gave me an air medal. I thought I'd had a bad day. She glanced at Eris. What you did makes my bad day look like a training sortie. Eris said nothing. What response was there? Santos continued. The investigation cleared you. No procedural violations. Textbook emergency handling given impossible circumstances. You're restored to flight status effective immediately. Relief was a physical sensation, warmth spreading through her chest. Thank you, ma'am. Santos stopped walking, turned to face her directly. I also read your file, every performance report, every evaluation. You're an exceptional pilot, consistently top tier. And yet I see comments in here that concern me. Lacks warmth in crew interactions. Could benefit from improved interpersonal dynamics. Tell me, Captain, do you think those comments would appear in a male pilot's file with your record? The question hung between them, dangerous and honest. Eris chose her words carefully. I couldn't say, ma'am. Santos smiled, sharp and knowing. Political answer, I respect that. Here's what I'll say, competence speaks. You proved that 4 days ago, but the military is also changing. We need pilots like you, not just flying, but leading, mentoring, showing the next generation what's possible. The suggestion landed strangely. Eris had never considered herself leadership material. She was a hammer pointed at problems and expected to solve them through application of force and skill. Teaching seemed antithetical to everything she'd built. I'm not sure I'm suited for instruction, General. Santos's expression softened. You're suited for whatever you decide you're suited for. I'm not ordering anything. I'm simply saying there are opportunities beyond the cockpit when you're ready. Think about it. That evening, Eris sat in the ready room alone, looking at photos on the wall. Decades of squadron history, pilots who'd served and moved on or died trying. Their faces young and optimistic, frozen in moments before they'd learned what war actually cost. She found herself wondering about legacy. What mark she'd leave, whether it mattered. The door opened. A lieutenant fresh to the squadron poked her head in nervously. Captain Kovac, sorry to bother you, I'm Jensen. Just checked in last week. Eris recognized the uncertainty in the young woman's posture, the way she held herself like she was taking up too much space. What can I do for you, Jensen? The lieutenant stepped inside, closing the door. I heard about what you did with the damaged aircraft. I wanted to say it was inspiring. I mean, I'm still learning the A-10, and there are days I wonder if I'm cut out for this. Everyone's so experienced, and I feel like I'm always one step behind. But hearing about your flight, how you just didn't quit even when everything was falling apart, it reminded me why I wanted to fly in the first place. Eris studied the young officer, saw herself 5 years ago, uncertain and determined in equal measure. "You'll be fine," she said. "It's not about being the best on day one. It's about showing up every day and getting better. The aircraft will teach you if you listen." Jensen nodded, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how. Finally, "Can I ask, how do you deal with the pressure? Everyone watching, waiting for you to make a mistake." The question cut closer than the lieutenant probably realized. Eris considered deflecting, offering some platitude about confidence and training, but something in the moment called for honesty. "You don't deal with it," she said finally. "You accept it. People are going to doubt you, especially if you're not what they expect to see in a cockpit. That's their limitation, not yours. Your job is to be so competent, so undeniably skilled, that doubt becomes irrelevant." Jensen absorbed this, nodded slowly. "Is that how you got the call sign Frost? Because you don't let anything get to you?" Eris smiled, bitter and amused. "They gave me that call sign because they thought I was cold, emotionless, a robot flying a plane. I kept it because it became armor. Let them think what they want. I know who I am." The lieutenant seemed to stand a little straighter. "Thank you, ma'am, for talking to me." After Jensen left, Eris sat in the quiet, ready room and realized something had shifted. General Santos's words echoed, mentoring, leading, showing what's possible. Maybe there was a purpose beyond the cockpit. Maybe bringing the aircraft home was just the first part of the mission. She pulled out her phone, typed a message to the squadron commander. "Sir, regarding future assignments, I'd like to discuss training opportunities." The reply came quickly. "My office, 800 tomorrow. We'll talk." The weight that had settled over her during the grounding began to lift. There was a path forward, different from what she'd imagined, but forward nonetheless. She was still Frost, still the pilot who'd brought a dying warthog home through fire and failing systems. But maybe, possibly, she could also be something more. 3 weeks later, Eris stood on the flight line watching the sunrise paint the Hindu Kush in shades of amber and rose. Her aircraft, a different tail number but same deadly grace, sat ready for the morning sortie. She'd been cleared to fly again, assigned to lead a two-ship for armed reconnaissance along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Standard mission. Routine as anything could be in a combat zone. But it felt different now, weighted with awareness of fragility and chance. Her wingman for the day was Jensen, the young lieutenant who'd sought her out in the ready room. The junior pilot approached with helmet tucked under arm, nervous energy barely contained. "Ready, ma'am," Eris nodded. "Walk with me." They moved through pre-flight together, Eris pointing out details, sharing small pieces of knowledge accumulated through hundreds of sorties. How to read the maintenance forms for underlying issues, which instruments to trust when systems conflicted. The importance of chair-flying missions mentally before strapping in physically. Jensen absorbed it all, asked intelligent questions, displayed the kind of teachable hunger that made good pilots great. "Remember," Eris said as they reached their respective aircraft, "the mission is to support ground forces and return safely. In that order, heroics get you killed. Smart, controlled aggression keeps everyone alive." Jensen grinned. "Got it, be like Frost." The word surprised her. When had her call sign become aspirational instead of insulting? When had cold competence transformed into something worth emulating? "Be like you," Eris corrected gently. "I'll teach you everything I know, but you have to bring your own fire to it." They launched into crystalline morning sky, two warthogs climbing in loose formation. The mountains fell away beneath them, ancient and indifferent. Eris felt the familiar rhythm return, the meditation of flight. Stick and rudder, throttle and trim, the eternal dance of physics and will. The mission unfolded without drama. They checked in with ground controllers, established orbit over designated sectors, watched the Earth turn beneath them in patient circles. Hours passed in radio chatter and position updates, peaceful almost, the kind of sortie where the greatest danger was complacency. Then, inevitably, the radio crackled with urgency. "Any Hawks, this is Cobra 24, troops in contact. Taking effective fire from compound at grid November Delta 732458. Request immediate close air support." Eris's adrenaline spiked, controlled and focused. "Cobra 24, Hog 31, Flight of two A-10s, full combat load, 5 minutes out, authenticate. The authentication exchange confirmed friendly identity. Eris banked hard, Jensen following flawlessly. They dove toward the coordinates, dropped altitude to attack pattern. Below, the landscape resolved into familiar patterns: mud-walled compounds, irrigation ditches, the careful geometry of rural Afghanistan. Smoke rose from one building complex, small arms fire visible as bright flickerings. "Jensen, you're cleared to observe," Eris transmitted. "Watch how we set this up. Talk on with ground controller, positive identification of friendly positions, then methodical target servicing. No rushing, no assumptions." She switched frequencies. "Cobra 2-4, Hog 3-1, I'm overhead. Mark your position with smoke." A green smoke grenade popped in a ditch line. Eris oriented, identified the enemy compound 400 meters north. Perfect separation. "Cobra 2-4, I'm visual your smoke and the target compound. Confirm no friendlies north of your position." "Hog 3-1, that's a firm. North of green smoke is hostile. We've got wounded and need them off us now." The desperation in the ground controller's voice was palpable. These were real people, bleeding and scared, depending on her. Eris felt the familiar cold clarity descend. Emotion boxed away, filed for later processing. Now was about precision and speed. She rolled in from the south, lined up the compound in her sight. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, that legendary 7-barrel monster, came alive with a sound like God tearing the sky in half. 30mm rounds walked through the compound's northern wall, shredding mud brick and anyone behind it. She pulled off, assessed. Secondary explosions indicated ammunition cooking off. Good hits. "Hog 3-1, direct hit. You got him. Fire stopped." Cobra 2-4's voice carried relief and gratitude in equal measure. Eris circled back, checked for additional threats. The tactical situation stabilized. "Cobra 2-4, Hog 3-1, continue to observe. We'll hold station until you're clear to extract your wounded." For another 20 minutes they orbited, guardian angels in titanium and ordnance. Eventually the ground force reported successful extraction, casualties loaded and moving to safe positions. The mission complete, Eris and Jensen climbed back to altitude, turned toward home. "That was incredible," Jensen breathed over the radio. "The way you set that up, no wasted movement, just calm and precise." Eris keyed the mic. "That's the job. They needed help. We provided it. Nothing incredible, just competent execution." But privately she acknowledged the satisfaction, the purpose. This was why she'd endured the doubts and the whispers and the condescension. For moments like this, where skill translated directly into saved lives. They landed at Bagram in the afternoon heat, shut down engines that ticked and cooled in the dry air. During debrief, the Special Operations Commander whose team they'd supported appeared personally to shake hands. "Frost," he said simply. "My guys wanted me to say thanks. You made a bad situation survivable." She accepted the gratitude with a nod, uncomfortable with the attention but recognizing its sincerity. That night the squadron held an informal gathering at the dining facility, the closest thing to celebration deployed life allowed. Pilots swapped stories, embellished war tales, engaged in the timeless ritual of military bonding. Eris sat slightly apart, nursing coffee and observing. She'd never been comfortable in these social contexts, never developed the easy camaraderie that seemed natural to others. But tonight felt different. Pilots approached, included her in conversations, asked her opinion on tactics and procedures. The wall that had always existed between her and the squadron was developing cracks. Lieutenant Jensen sat down uninvited, brought a second coffee. "I've been thinking about what you said," the younger pilot began. "About bringing your own fire. I wanted to ask what that means to you. What fire do you bring?" Eris considered the question, its unexpected depth. "Refusal," she said finally. "I refuse to accept limits that aren't real. I refuse to be less than I'm capable of being. I refuse to quit when things get hard. That refusal, that stubbornness, that's my fire." Jensen nodded thoughtfully. "And the cold thing, the call sign?" "A tool," Eris answered. When you're in the cockpit and everything's falling apart, emotions cloud judgment. The cold lets you think clearly, act precisely. But it's not who I am. It's just armor I wear when necessary. The conversation drifted to other topics, but Eris felt something shift internally. Maybe Santos was right. Maybe there was value in articulating these lessons, passing them forward. She'd spent so long proving herself that she'd never considered helping others do the same. Over the following months, Eris flew dozens more missions. Each one refined her skills, added to her reputation. But increasingly, her time was spent in classrooms and briefing rooms, teaching younger pilots the craft she'd mastered through determination and blood. She discovered she was good at instruction, able to break down complex maneuvers into understandable components, to identify weaknesses and provide targeted feedback. The squadron began to change around her. New pilots arrived and were introduced to Frost not as a cold, distant figure, but as the pilot who'd brought back the burning warthog. The story had been polished by retelling into something approaching legend. Some details were exaggerated, others simplified, but the core remained true. When it mattered most, she'd refused to quit. That refusal became a teaching tool. When students struggled with difficult procedures or questioned whether they belonged, instructors would reference that flight. If Kavach could nurse a dying aircraft home through sheer will and skill, what excuse did anyone else have for giving up when things got hard? Eris found herself uncomfortable with the pedestal but recognized its utility. If her experience could motivate others to push through their own doubts, then the terror of that day gained additional meaning. Legacy wasn't just what she accomplished personally. It was what those she trained went on to achieve. 6 months after the incident, General Santos returned to Bagram. She requested a meeting with Eris in her quarters, informal and private. They sat with coffee as evening light filtered through dusty windows. "I'm retiring," Santos said without preamble. 32 years, it's time, but before I go I wanted to follow up on our last conversation. You've been instructing, how's it going? Eris considered her response. Better than expected. I thought I'd hate it, but there's something satisfying about watching pilots develop, seeing them get better. Santos smiled. That's good, because I'd like to recommend you for weapons school. You've got the tactical expertise, and you've proven your ability to perform under pressure. Weapons school would give you credentials to teach at the highest level. The suggestion was monumental. Weapons school was the apex of Air Force tactical education, a crucible that produced the instructors who trained everyone else. It was also notoriously difficult, designed to break even experienced pilots and rebuild them as tactical experts. I'm honored, General, but why me? There are pilots with more experience, better political connections. Santos set down her coffee. Because you understand something most pilots don't. You know what it's like to be underestimated, to have to prove yourself every single day. That knowledge makes you a better instructor. You see students other instructors might overlook. And frankly, the Air Force needs more instructors who understand that competence doesn't look one specific way. Eris felt the weight of expectation and opportunity balanced on that moment. Weapons school would be grueling, months of intense study and evaluation. It would also be a statement, a validation that her approach, the cold, precise, relentless competence, was not just acceptable but exemplary. When would I start? She asked. Santos's smile widened. That's the answer I hoped for. You'll rotate back to the States in 3 months. Class begins in January. Between now and then, keep doing what you're doing. Fly, teach, be the example. The general stood, prepared to leave, then paused. One more thing, that call sign, Frost. I know where it came from, the mockery behind it, but you've transformed it into something else. Own that transformation. Let it represent not coldness but clarity, not absence of emotion but mastery of it. After Santos departed, Eris sat alone with those words. Transformation, mastery, legacy. Concepts that had seemed irrelevant when she was focused solely on surviving each day, each mission. Now they represented a path forward, a way to make the struggle meaningful beyond her personal achievement. She pulled out her tablet, began researching weapons school requirements. The curriculum was daunting, the failure rate high. but she'd faced impossible odds before and prevailed. This was just another challenge, another opportunity to demonstrate what refusal looked like in action. Her final months in Afghanistan passed in a blur of missions and instruction. She flew with different wingmen, each sortie a chance to demonstrate technique and decision-making. The younger pilots absorbed the lessons, asked intelligent questions, grew more confident in their capabilities. Eris watched their development with satisfaction that surprised her. She'd always measured success personally, in her own performance. Discovering that others' growth could provide similar fulfillment was revelation. The squadron threw her a farewell event before her rotation home. It was awkward and touching in equal measure, pilots presenting her with a plaque commemorating the emergency landing. The nose art from Hog 27, that frost pattern and her call sign, had been preserved and mounted. Chief Holland presented it personally. "Every time a pilot in this squadron doubts whether they can handle what the mission throws at them," he said, "they can look at this and remember that Frost brought it home. Remember that quitting is a choice, and you can choose differently." Eris accepted the plaque, found her throat tight with unexpected emotion. These people, this squadron, had become more than colleagues. They were testament to transformation, hers and theirs. "Thank you," she managed, "for giving me the chance to prove what I could do, and for letting me help others do the same." Lieutenant Jensen, now more confident and seasoned, raised a cup. "To Frost," she declared, "who taught us that cold precision is just another word for controlled excellence." The squadron echoed the toast. Eris stood among them, armor momentarily set aside, allowing herself to feel the connection. This was legacy, not plaques or medals, but the knowledge and skills passed forward. The students who would train others, who would face their own impossible moments and remember what she'd taught them. Weapons school was everything she'd been warned about and worse. The academic load was crushing, the flight requirements exhausting, the evaluation metrics unforgiving. Instructors pushed students to failure points deliberately, testing not just skills but character. Eris embraced the crucible. Every difficult sortie, every failed procedure that required additional study, every moment of doubt became fuel. She would not quit, would not accept that this was beyond her capability. The other students were talented, connected, many from prestigious backgrounds. But she had something they lacked: intimate understanding of what it meant to fly when systems were failing and options narrowing, and the only thing between disaster and survival was skill and will. Halfway through the course, during a particularly complex air-to-ground integration exercise, Eris found herself leading a foreship against a notional target defended by simulated air defenses and fighters. The scenario was designed to be overwhelming, the problems cascading faster than solutions could be implemented. She felt the familiar cold clarity descend. Prioritized threats, allocated aircraft, coordinated timing, improvised when the plan disintegrated. Her flight achieved target destruction with no losses. The debrief was brutal anyway. Instructors dissected every decision, challenged every assumption. But at the end, the senior instructor, a colonel with combat experience dating to Desert Storm, nodded slowly. "Kavach, that was acceptable execution under impossible constraints. You kept a clear head when the problem set exceeded available solutions. That's what we're looking for, not perfection but competence under pressure." The praise was minimal but meaningful. Eris felt vindication settle in her chest. She belonged here, had earned her place through demonstration, not politics or connections. The remaining months passed in a haze of study, flight, and refinement. She graduated weapons school in the top third of her class, earned the right to wear the patch that marked her as a graduate, became authorized to instruct at the highest levels of tactical aviation. Her follow-on assignment was to an operational squadron as a flight lead and instructor. The unit was transitioning to younger pilots, needed experienced aviators who could mentor and develop talent. Eris arrived with her credentials and her reputation. The story of the burning warthog had spread beyond Afghanistan, become part of Air Force lore. She was recognized immediately, introduced as Frost, the pilot who refused to quit. The expectation was heavy but not unwelcome. She'd spent years proving herself. Now she could focus on helping others do the same. The first student assigned to her was a captain named Rodriguez, talented but overconfident, the kind of pilot who believed natural ability excused detailed preparation. Eris identified the weakness immediately. During their first training sortie, she manufactured a scenario that overwhelmed Rodriguez's ability to improvise. The captain made predictable mistakes, compounded errors, ultimately failed the training objective. In the debrief, Rodriguez was defensive. That scenario was unfair. Nobody could have succeeded. Eris met his eyes with winter-cold assessment. I did. Yesterday, same scenario, same constraints. The difference is I studied the tactics manual you skimmed. I chair flew the mission 6 times before briefing. I prepared for failure because failure is always possible. You relied on talent and hoped it would be enough. It wasn't. Rodriguez flushed with anger and embarrassment. So what, you're saying I don't belong here? I'm saying you haven't earned the right to be as confident as you act, Eris replied. Talent is the baseline. Work ethic and preparation separate average pilots from exceptional ones. You want to be exceptional, prove it. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time. The conversation was harsh, potentially career-impacting if Rodriguez complained to leadership. But Eris had learned that honesty, delivered with clear expectation, motivated better than coddling. Rodriguez could rise to the challenge or wash out. Either way, the standard would not be lowered. Over the following weeks, Rodriguez transformed. He arrived early for briefs, stayed late asking questions, chair flew missions until the procedures were instinctive. His flight performance improved dramatically. In a particularly complex training scenario involving coordination with ground forces and artillery, Rodriguez executed flawlessly, demonstrated the kind of tactical competence that made good pilots great. During the debrief, Eris allowed herself a small smile. Much better. That's what preparation looks like. Rodriguez met her gaze. Thank you, ma'am, for not letting me skate by on talent. I needed someone to call me out. The exchange reminded Eris of her conversation with Jensen, years ago now. The cycle of mentorship, harsh truths delivered with intent to improve rather than diminish. She was becoming the instructor she'd needed when she was struggling to prove herself, offering the guidance that had been absent in her own development. Other students followed, each with unique strengths and weaknesses. Eris tailored her approach, maintained high standards while recognizing individual differences. She discovered she had capacity for patience she'd never suspected, ability to break down complex problems into digestible pieces. The cold precision that had defined her flying translated well into instruction. She could assess student performance objectively, provide feedback without emotion clouding judgment, identify exactly where understanding broke down and reinforce fundamentals. Years passed. Eris rose in rank, her reputation expanding beyond single communities. She became known not just as the pilot who brought back the burning warthog, but as the instructor who transformed marginal students into competent aviators. Leaders sought her input on training programs. She authored tactical papers, presented at conferences, became a voice for evolving close air support doctrine. The recognition was professionally satisfying but also strange, uncomfortable in its visibility. 10 years after the emergency landing at Bagram, Eris was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to command a training squadron. The responsibility was immense, hundreds of students flowing through annually, each requiring attention and development. She approached command the way she approached everything, with meticulous preparation and refusal to accept mediocrity. Her squadron became known for rigorous standards and exceptional graduate quality. Students who trained under her command went on to combat deployments and returned with stories of how her instruction had saved lives, prevented mistakes, built competence that mattered when the shooting started. One evening, during a quiet moment in her office, Eris received a message from General Santos, now retired but still connected to Air Force networks. The message was brief. Saw your promotion. Well deserved. You've become exactly what I hoped. The students you train will train others and your legacy will compound. Proud of you. Santos. Eris read the message several times, felt something warm and unfamiliar in her chest. Pride, perhaps, or satisfaction. She'd spent so long fighting to prove herself that she'd never stopped to recognize what she'd built. A career defined not by single moments of heroism but by sustained excellence. Students trained, lives saved, standards maintained. That burning flight over Afghanistan had been one day. Important, defining, but ultimately just the beginning. Everything since had been the real work, the daily commitment to excellence that transformed moment into movement. She thought about the young pilot she'd been, angry and determined and alone. That pilot had believed competence was armor, that if she was good enough, skilled enough, she could force respect through undeniable capability. She'd been partially right. Competence mattered, but connection mattered too. Legacy wasn't solitary achievement. It was the network of people trained, inspired, pushed to exceed their perceived limitations. Eris opened her desk drawer, pulled out the plaque from her Afghanistan squadron. The frost pattern knows art, preserved and mounted. She traced the lines with one finger, remembered the feel of that dying aircraft's controls, the desperation and determination of bringing it home. That day had taught her she was capable of more than she'd imagined. The years since had taught her the same lesson applied to purpose and meaning. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a builder of pilots, a link in a chain extending forward through time. Her office phone rang, interrupting the reflection. The operations officer needed input on next quarter's training schedule. Eris set aside the plaque, turned her attention to the immediate task. There was always another mission, another problem requiring solution. That was the nature of service. The work continued, day after day, student after student. Some would excel immediately. Others would struggle and need her particular brand of harsh encouragement. All would benefit from instruction rooted in experience, delivered by someone who understood what it meant to face impossible situations and refuse to quit. The sun set beyond her office window, painting the flight line in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere, students were pre-flight aircraft for night training. In Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, pilots she'd trained were providing close air support for ground forces. In classrooms across the Air Force, instructors who'd learned from her were passing forward lessons in tactics and decision-making. The legacy compounded, exactly as Santos had predicted. Not through individual heroism, but through sustained commitment to excellence, to teaching, to building capability in others. Eris stood, straightened her uniform, prepared to head to the flight line for evening operations. Her call sign, Frost, was embroidered on her flight suit. No longer mockery. Now it was brand, promise, standard. Cold precision in service of warm purpose. Clarity under pressure. Refusal transformed into capability. She'd earned every thread of that embroidery in fire and fear and relentless work. The burning was history now, story told in ready rooms across the force. But the pilot who'd flown it home was very much present, still flying, still teaching, still refusing to accept that limitations were anything but challenges to overcome. That was the real legacy. Not survival of one day, but transformation of every day since. Frost walked to the flight line under cooling desert sky, ready for whatever came next. The mission continued. It always would. And she would continue meeting it with competence, determination, and the cold clarity that had become her signature. Not because she was extraordinary, but because she'd learned, through fire and survival and patient years of teaching, that excellence was simply the refusal to be anything less than completely, undeniably capable. That was enough. It had always been enough. And she would spend whatever remained of her career proving it to everyone who doubted, everyone who struggled, everyone who needed to know that they too could bring the burning aircraft home if they refused to quit.